Question 1. The control framework reveals a critical requirement for maintaining immutable backup copies of financial transaction data for a period of 7 years, as mandated by SEC Rule 17A4F, when implementing IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. Which approach best ensures compliance with this regulatory obligation while leveraging the product's capabilities? Option A. Schedule regular manual reviews of backup logs to confirm data integrity and manually delete backups after the 7-year retention period has passed. Option B. Focus on increasing the frequency of backups to ensure that multiple copies of the data are available without specifically configuring immutability features. Option C. Implement standard backup policies with a 7-year retention period, relying on the assumption that backups will not be intentionally modified or deleted before the retention period expires. Option D. Configure Spectrum Protect Plus to utilize object storage with worm. Write once, read many immutability policies enabled for the backup data, ensuring that data cannot be altered or deleted for the specified retention period. Correct answer is D. Configure Spectrum Protect Plus to utilize object storage with worm. Write once, read many immutability policies enabled for the backup data, ensuring that data cannot be altered or deleted for the specified retention period. Explanation. The control framework reveals a common challenge in implementing IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. Ensuring data immutability for regulatory compliance. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a deep understanding of both the technical capabilities of Spectrum Protect Plus and the specific regulatory mandates governing data retention and protection within the relevant jurisdiction, assumed to be US-based for this example, aligning with typical IBM product deployment contexts. The need to balance operational efficiency with stringent legal requirements necessitates careful judgment. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the regulatory requirement for immutable backups, which are critical for preventing data tampering and ensuring data integrity in the event of a cyber attack or legal discovery. Implementing Spectrum Protect Plus with immutable storage targets, such as object storage with immutability policies enabled, directly aligns with regulations like SEC Rule 17A4F or FINRA Rule 4511, which mandate that certain electronic records be maintained in a non-erasable, non-rewritable format. This approach ensures that the data, once written, cannot be altered or deleted for the duration of the retention period, providing a robust defense against data loss and regulatory noncompliance. An incorrect approach that relies solely on standard backup policies without explicit immutability configurations fails to meet the stringent requirements for data integrity and non-alterability. This would represent a significant regulatory failure, potentially leading to fines and reputational damage if the organization cannot produce auditable, immutable records as required by law. Another incorrect approach, such as relying on manual deletion policies after the retention period, is also professionally unacceptable. This method introduces human error and is inherently susceptible to accidental or malicious deletion before the mandated retention period expires, violating the core principle of immutability and exposing the organization to regulatory penalties. A third incorrect approach, focusing only on backup frequency without considering the immutability aspect, overlooks the critical requirement that the data must be protected from modification, not just backed up. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the specific regulatory landscape applicable to their industry and data types. This involves consulting legal and compliance teams to identify all relevant data retention and immutability mandates. Subsequently, they must evaluate the technical capabilities of their chosen data protection solution, such as IBM Spectrum Protect Plus, to ensure it can meet these mandates. The implementation plan should then be designed to leverage these capabilities, with a strong emphasis on configuring and verifying immutable storage targets and policies. Regular audits and testing of the immutability controls are essential to confirm ongoing compliance and operational effectiveness. Question 2. Implementation of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 for virtual machine backup and recovery requires careful consideration of several factors to ensure data integrity and compliance. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional best practices and regulatory expectations for a robust data protection strategy? Option A. Prioritizing rapid deployment by installing IBM Spectrum Protect Plus with default settings and relying on standard network configurations without a detailed assessment of virtual machine workloads and recovery objectives. Option B. Conducting a comprehensive assessment of the virtual infrastructure, defining clear recovery point objectives, RPO, and recovery time objectives, RTO, and tailoring backup policies, storage, and network configurations to meet these requirements and IBM's recommended deployment guidelines. Option C. Implementing backup jobs during peak production hours to leverage available network bandwidth, without considering the potential impact on virtual machine performance and user experience. Option D. Focusing solely on minimizing storage costs by implementing the shortest possible data retention periods, irrespective of regulatory mandates or business needs for historical data recovery. The correct answer is A. Prioritizing rapid deployment by installing IBM Spectrum Protect Plus with default settings and relying on standard network configurations without a detailed assessment of virtual machine workloads and recovery objectives. Explanation: Scenario analysis. Implementing IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 for backup and recovery of virtualized environments presents a professional challenge due to the critical nature of data integrity and availability. Organizations rely on these solutions to meet stringent recovery point objectives, RPO, and recovery time objectives, RTO, while adhering to data retention policies mandated by regulatory bodies. Misconfigurations or suboptimal deployment strategies can lead to data loss, extended downtime, non-compliance with regulations, and significant financial penalties. The challenge lies in balancing performance, cost-effectiveness, and robust data protection capabilities within the specific operational and regulatory context. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the existing virtual infrastructure, including the hypervisor type, e.g., VMware vSphere, Microsoft Hyper-V, the number and size of virtual machines, the storage architecture, and network bandwidth. This assessment informs the selection of appropriate backup policies, such as frequency, retention periods, and the use of incremental or differential backups. Furthermore, it dictates the optimal placement of the IBM Spectrum Protect Plus server and its associated data movers to ensure efficient data transfer and minimal impact on production workloads. Adhering to IBM's best practices for deployment, including proper network configuration, storage provisioning, and security hardening, is paramount. This approach ensures that the solution is tailored to the specific environment, maximizing backup success rates, minimizing recovery times, and meeting defined service level agreements, SLAs, and regulatory compliance requirements for data retention and recoverability. Incorrect approach is analysis. An incorrect approach would be to deploy IBM Spectrum Protect Plus without a comprehensive understanding of the virtual environment's specific needs and constraints. For instance, simply installing the software and accepting default settings without tuning backup policies based on RPO/RTO requirements would be a significant failure. This could lead to backups that are too infrequent to meet RPOs or recovery processes that are too slow to meet RTOs. Another incorrect approach is neglecting to consider the network topology and bandwidth, potentially leading to backup jobs that saturate the network, impacting production performance, or fail due to insufficient throughput. Failing to implement appropriate security measures for the Spectrum Protect Plus server and its data, such as access controls and encryption, would also be a critical regulatory and ethical failure, exposing sensitive data to unauthorized access or compromise, which violates data protection principles and potentially specific data privacy regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic, requirements-driven approach. This begins with a detailed discovery phase to understand the client's infrastructure, business objectives, and regulatory obligations. Based on this, a solution design should be developed, outlining the architecture, configuration, and operational procedures. Implementation should follow a phased approach with rigorous testing at each stage. Post-implementation, continuous monitoring and regular review of backup and recovery performance are essential to ensure ongoing compliance and effectiveness. This iterative process allows for adjustments to be made proactively, mitigating risks and ensuring the solution consistently meets its intended purpose. Question 3. Risk assessment procedures indicate a critical data loss event has occurred, requiring immediate restoration of services. The The organization operates under strict data retention regulations that mandate specific periods for different types of sensitive information. The IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. One environment contains multiple backup versions of the affected data, which approach best aligns with regulatory compliance and professional data management practices when restoring the data. Option A. Restore the data to the most recent available backup version to ensure all recent changes are recovered. Option B. Restore the data to a point in time before the incident occurred, discarding any data that was created after that point and is still within its retention period. Option C. Restore the data to a point in time that adheres to the defined data retention policy for the specific data type, even if it means not restoring the absolute latest backup. Option D. Restore all available backup versions of the data to ensure no information is lost, irrespective of retention periods. Correct answer is A. Restore the data to the most recent available backup version to ensure all recent changes are recovered. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in IT environments where data protection and compliance are paramount. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for efficient data recovery with the strict requirements of data retention policies, especially when dealing with sensitive information. The pressure to restore services quickly can sometimes lead to shortcuts that inadvertently violate regulatory mandates. Professionals must exercise careful judgment to ensure that recovery processes do not compromise the integrity or accessibility of data beyond its legally defined retention period, or conversely, prematurely discard data that is still subject to retention. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves leveraging IBM Spectrum Protect Plus's capabilities to restore data to a point in time that aligns with the established data retention policy. This demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing compliance with regulatory frameworks. Specifically, it ensures that data is not retained for longer than legally required, which can lead to increased storage costs and potential security risks. Nor is it deleted prematurely, which could result in non-compliance with legal discovery or audit requirements. This approach directly addresses the regulatory obligation to manage data lifecycle according to defined policies, a critical aspect of data governance and compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. Restoring data to the most recent available backup without considering the retention policy is a regulatory failure. This could lead to the retention of data beyond its legally mandated period, exposing the organization to unnecessary risks and potential fines for noncompliance with data minimization principles. Restoring data to a point before the incident occurred, even if it means discarding data that is still within its retention period, is also a regulatory failure. This action constitutes premature data destruction, which can have severe consequences during legal discovery, audits, or other compliance-related investigations. It directly violates the principle of maintaining data for its required duration. Ignoring the data retention policy altogether and performing a full restore of all available data, regardless of its age, is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach not only incurs unnecessary storage costs, but also creates a substantial compliance risk by retaining data that should have been purged, potentially exposing sensitive information and violating data privacy regulations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of all applicable regulatory requirements and internal data retention policies. Before initiating any recovery operation, they must consult these policies to determine the acceptable retention periods for different data types. The recovery strategy should then be designed to align with these policies, ensuring that the restored data is at a point in time that respects both the need for service restoration and the legal obligations for data retention and disposal. This proactive approach, integrating compliance into the recovery process, is essential for mitigating risks and maintaining organizational integrity. Question 4. The evaluation methodology shows that a new IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. One environment is being deployed for a financial services organization. The project team is under significant time pressure to make the system operational. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory requirements for data protection and security in this context? Option A. Deploy the IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. One solution with basic functionality first, and plan to address detailed security configurations like encryption and granular access controls in a subsequent phase after the system is live. Option B. Enable all available security features and logging mechanisms immediately upon installation, even if some configurations are not fully understood or tailored to specific roles, to ensure maximum initial protection. Option C. Focus on achieving full data backup and recovery functionality first, and defer the implementation of encryption and detailed access control configurations until after the initial operational readiness review. Option D. Prioritize the configuration of encryption for data at rest, and in transit, implement role-based access controls with the principle of least privilege, and ensure comprehensive audit logging of all administrative and data access activities as part of the initial deployment plan. The correct answer is D. Prioritize the configuration of encryption for data at rest, and in transit, implement role-based access controls with the principle of least privilege, and ensure comprehensive audit logging of all administrative and data access activities as part of the initial deployment plan. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in IT implementation projects, balancing the need for rapid deployment with the imperative of adhering to established security and data protection regulations. The pressure to deliver a functional IBM Spectrum Protect plus V10. 1. One solution quickly can lead to shortcuts that bypass critical security configurations. The professional challenge lies in resisting this pressure and ensuring that compliance is not an afterthought, but an integral part of the implementation process. The potential consequences of noncompliance, such as data breaches, regulatory fines, and reputational damage, underscore the need for meticulous attention to detail and a thorough understanding of the relevant regulatory framework. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes the implementation of robust security controls as mandated by the regulatory framework governing IBM Spectrum Protect plus V10. 1. This involves configuring encryption for data at rest and in transit, implementing strict access controls based on the principle of least privilege, and establishing regular audit logging for all administrative and data access activities. These measures directly address common regulatory requirements for data confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Adhering to these specific configurations ensures that the solution not only meets functional requirements, but also operates within the bounds of legal and ethical data handling practices, thereby mitigating risks and demonstrating due diligence. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing security controls only after the initial deployment, without a predefined plan and validation, represents a significant regulatory failure. This reactive approach increases the risk of vulnerabilities being exposed during the interim period, potentially leading to unauthorized access or data compromise. It also suggests a lack of proactive risk management, which is a cornerstone of many data protection regulations. Deploying the solution without enabling audit logging for administrative actions is another critical failure. Audit logs are essential for accountability and for investigating security incidents. Their absence hinders the ability to track who performed what actions and when, making it impossible to comply with regulations that require traceability of data access and system changes. Configuring the solution with default administrative credentials and broad access permissions for all users is a severe security and regulatory lapse. This directly violates the principle of least privilege, a fundamental security best practice and often a regulatory mandate. It creates an environment ripe for insider threats and accidental data exposure, as users have access to more data and functionality than they require for their roles. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to implementation, integrating security and compliance considerations from the outset. This involves a thorough understanding of the IBM Spectrum Protect plus V10. 1. Documentation. The specific regulatory requirements applicable to the organization's data and best practices for secure system deployment. A checklist or a phased implementation plan that explicitly includes security configuration and validation steps is crucial. Regular training and awareness of evolving regulatory landscapes are also vital to maintaining a compliant and secure environment. Question 5. Governance review demonstrates that IBM Spectrum Protect plus V10. 1 was implemented across several critical systems without a formally approved change request or documented risk assessment. The implementation was necessary to meet urgent data protection requirements. What is the most appropriate course of action to address this governance oversight? Option A. Immediately uninstall IBM Spectrum Protect plus V10. One from all systems and proceed with a new, formal change request and implementation process. Option B. Submit a retrospective change request for the implemented IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. Including all relevant documentation, risk assessment, and justification for the expedited implementation and seek formal approval. Option C. Document the current state of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. Implementation in the configuration management database and consider it an accepted operational state. Option D. Escalate the issue to senior management and request a waiver for the change control process due to the urgent nature of the original implementation. The correct answer is B. Submit a retrospective change request for the implemented IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. Including all relevant documentation, risk assessment, and justification for the expedited implementation and seek formal approval. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in IT governance where a critical operational component, IBM Spectrum Protect Plus SPP V10. 1. Has been implemented without formal, documented approval and adherence to established change management processes. The professional challenge lies in balancing the immediate need to rectify the governance gap with the potential disruption to ongoing operations and the risk of further noncompliance. Careful judgment is required to ensure that the chosen path not only addresses the immediate oversight, but also reinforces robust governance practices for the future. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a structured and compliant resolution. By initiating a formal retrospective change request, the IT team acknowledges the deviation from policy, documents the implementation, and seeks appropriate authorization. This aligns with standard IT governance frameworks and regulatory expectations that mandate auditable change control processes. It ensures that all implemented changes, even those made under pressure or oversight, are reviewed, approved, and documented, thereby maintaining the integrity of the IT environment and demonstrating due diligence. This proactive step mitigates future risks by establishing a precedent for proper procedure. An incorrect approach that involves simply documenting the existing implementation without seeking retrospective approval fails to address the fundamental governance failure. This is a regulatory and ethical failure because it bypasses the established control mechanisms designed to ensure that changes are assessed for risk, impact, and alignment with business objectives. Creates an as-is state that is not formally sanctioned, leaving the organization vulnerable to audit findings and potentially non-compliant with internal policies or external regulations that require documented change management. Another incorrect approach, which is to immediately uninstall and reinstall SPP V10. 1 following the correct procedure is also professionally unacceptable. While it aims to correct the process, it introduces unnecessary operational risk and potential data loss or service disruption. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the principle of least disruption and a failure to consider the business impact of IT decisions. Ethically, it prioritizes procedural correction over operational stability and business continuity, which is a misapplication of governance principles. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a thorough assessment of the deviation, its impact, and the available remediation options. This includes understanding the specific regulatory framework governing IT operations, in this case, implied by the exam's focus on IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 Implementation, likely within a corporate or service provider context with standard IT governance requirements. The decision maker should then evaluate each option against principles of compliance, risk management, operational stability, and efficiency. The goal is to find the most effective and least disruptive path to re-establish compliance and reinforce governance, rather than simply correcting the process in isolation. Question 6. Investigation of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 Backup data retention compliance reveals that while retention policies are configured within the software, there is no documented process for periodically verifying that these configurations are actively enforcing the mandated retention periods for all protected data. What is the most appropriate professional action to ensure ongoing compliance? Option A. Assume that the configured retention settings within IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 are automatically and continuously enforced without the need for explicit verification. Option B. Rely solely on monitoring the available storage capacity within IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. To infer that data is being retained according to policy. Option C. Implement a documented procedure to regularly review IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. 1. Backup job configurations, retention rules, and audit logs to confirm adherence to the established data retention policy. Option D. Focus only on verifying the retention settings for the most recent backup jobs, as older data is less likely to be subject to current policy requirements. The correct answer is C. Implement a documented procedure to regularly review IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. 1. Backup job configurations, retention rules, and audit logs to confirm adherence to the established data retention policy. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in data protection and recovery, ensuring compliance with data retention policies while managing storage costs and operational efficiency. The professional must balance the need for regulatory adherence with the practicalities of system management. The complexity arises from the potential for data loss, regulatory penalties, and operational disruption if retention policies are not correctly implemented and verified. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic verification process that directly addresses the IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. 1. Implementation's configuration against the defined data retention policy. This includes reviewing backup job configurations, retention rules within Spectrum Protect Plus, and audit logs to confirm that data is being retained for the mandated period. This directly aligns with the principles of data governance and regulatory compliance, ensuring that the system is functioning as intended to meet legal and business requirements. It demonstrates due diligence in verifying that the implemented solution adheres to the established policy. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to assume that simply setting a retention period within the IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. 1 interface is sufficient without further verification. This fails to account for potential misconfigurations, software bugs, or changes in policy that might not have been reflected in the system settings. This oversight could lead to non-compliance, data loss beyond the required retention period, or premature deletion of data, all of which carry significant regulatory and business risks. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on storage capacity reports to infer that data is being retained correctly. Storage capacity is a measure of volume, not a direct indicator of whether data is being kept for the correct duration according to policy. Data might be present but not meeting the retention requirements, or conversely, storage might be full due to data being retained for too long, impacting operational efficiency and potentially violating cost-related directives. This approach lacks the specificity required for compliance verification. A third incorrect approach would be to only check the most recent backup retention settings without considering historical data or the full life cycle of backups. Data retention policies often apply to all data within a specified period. Failing to examine the retention of older backups or the impact of policy changes over time means that compliance might only be partially met, leaving gaps in the data protection strategy and potential for regulatory breaches. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured, evidence-based approach. This involves 1. Clearly understanding the data retention policy requirements. 2. Reviewing the specific configuration of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. Focusing on how these requirements are translated into system settings. 3. Implementing verification procedures that actively check for compliance, such as reviewing audit trails, running compliance reports, and performing sample data checks. 4. Documenting all verification steps and findings to provide an auditable record of due diligence. This systematic process minimizes risk and ensures accountability. Question 7. What factors determine the most appropriate recovery point selection in IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10? 1. When an incident suggests potential data corruption in recent backups while adhering to strict data retention policies. Option A. The number of virtual machines or applications that were impacted by the incident. Option B. The size of the backup data set and the available storage capacity for the restored data. Option C. The integrity of the backup data, the nature of the incident, and the adherence of the recovery point to defined data retention periods. Option D. The speed at which the latest available backup can be restored to minimize downtime. Correct answer is C. The integrity of the backup data, the nature of the incident, and the adherence of the recovery point to defined data retention periods. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in data protection and recovery, balancing the need for rapid data restoration with the imperative to maintain data integrity and comply with regulatory requirements for data retention and immutability. The professional challenge lies in selecting the most appropriate recovery strategy when faced with potential data corruption or an incident that necessitates a rollback to a specific point in time, while also adhering to the strict guidelines of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. Implementation within its defined regulatory framework. The correct approach prioritizes a thorough assessment of the data's integrity and the nature of the incident before initiating recovery. This involves leveraging the capabilities of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus to identify the most recent, uncorrupted, and compliant recovery point. This aligns with best professional practice by ensuring that the recovery process is not only technically sound, but also legally and ethically defensible. It upholds the principle of data integrity, a cornerstone of data protection regulations, by avoiding the reintroduction of corrupted data or the restoration of data that violates retention policies. An incorrect approach that immediately restores the latest available backup without verification fails to address the potential for corruption within that backup itself. This could lead to the reintroduction of the very issues that caused the incident or the restoration of data that is no longer compliant with retention mandates, potentially resulting in regulatory penalties and a loss of trust. Another incorrect approach, which focuses solely on restoring the most recent snapshot without considering the impact on application consistency, risks data corruption at the application level, leading to further operational disruptions and potential data loss. A third incorrect approach, which involves manual data reconstruction without utilizing the established recovery mechanisms of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus, is inefficient, prone to human error, and bypasses the audit trails and integrity checks inherent in the software, thereby creating significant compliance risks. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the incident's scope and impact. This is followed by an evaluation of available recovery points within IBM Spectrum Protect Plus, considering factors such as data integrity, application consistency, and regulatory compliance, e.g. retention periods. The chosen recovery strategy should then be validated against these criteria before execution. This systematic approach ensures that recovery operations are robust, compliant, and minimize the risk of further data loss or regulatory noncompliance. Question 8. When evaluating the implementation of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 for financial services organization subject to strict data retention and audit regulations, which approach best ensures compliance with data immutability requirements for regulatory archives, while also supporting efficient operational recovery. Option A. Rely on the default retention settings within IBM Spectrum Protect Plus, assuming they adequately cover regulatory requirements for data preservation. Option B. Configure IBM Spectrum Protect Plus to enforce immutable retention policies for all backup data, ensuring that critical financial transaction records are protected against modification or deletion for the legally mandated period, and utilize separate, shorter retention policies for less critical operational backups. Option C. Prioritize operational recovery speed by setting the shortest possible retention periods for all backup data, and address regulatory inquiries on a case-by-case basis if specific historical data is requested. Option D. Implement immutability for a limited subset of data deemed most critical for immediate business operations, without a comprehensive review of all regulatory retention obligations. The correct answer is B. Configure IBM Spectrum Protect Plus to enforce immutable retention policies for all backup data, ensuring that critical financial transaction records are protected against modification or deletion for the legally mandated period, and utilize separate, shorter retention policies for less critical operational backups. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in data protection and disaster recovery planning, balancing the need for rapid recovery with the regulatory requirements for data retention and immutability. The core tension lies between the business's desire for immediate access to the most recent data and the legal/compliance mandate to preserve data for a specified period, potentially in an unalterable format. To meet audit and legal discovery obligations, the professional's responsibility is to implement a solution that satisfies both operational needs and stringent regulatory frameworks, ensuring data integrity and availability while adhering to retention policies. Failure to do so can result in significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves configuring IBM Spectrum Protect Plus to leverage its immutability features for critical backup data, ensuring that this data cannot be altered or deleted for the duration of the defined retention period. This directly addresses the regulatory requirement for data preservation and auditability. By setting appropriate retention policies within Spectrum Protect Plus, the solution guarantees that data remains accessible and tamper-proof for compliance purposes, even if operational recovery needs might favor shorter retention cycles for less critical data. This aligns with the principles of data integrity and non-repudiation, which are often implicitly or explicitly mandated by data protection regulations. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely rely on the default retention settings of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus without explicitly configuring immutability for compliance-driven data. This could lead to data being overwritten or deleted prematurely, violating retention policies and exposing the organization to regulatory noncompliance. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize operational recovery speed over immutability by configuring shorter retention periods for all data, assuming that recent data is sufficient for all business needs. This ignores the legal and audit requirements that necessitate longer retention of specific data sets, regardless of their immediate operational relevance. A third incorrect approach is to implement immutability without considering the storage implications and costs, potentially leading to an unsustainable storage footprint that strains the IT budget and operational efficiency. This demonstrates a lack of holistic planning that integrates technical implementation with business and compliance realities. Professional reasoning. Professionals must adopt a risk-based approach, first identifying data subject to specific regulatory retention requirements. This involves close collaboration with legal, compliance, and business stakeholders. Once identified, the technical implementation should prioritize meeting these immutable retention mandates using the capabilities of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus. This includes understanding and configuring features like immutability policies and appropriate retention periods. Regular audits and testing of the backup and recovery processes, including verification of data immutability, are crucial to ensure ongoing compliance and operational readiness. The decision-making process should always weigh the potential consequences of non-compliance against the technical and financial feasibility of implementing compliance solutions. Question 9. Process analysis reveals that a critical application has become inaccessible due to suspected data corruption. The IT operations team needs to restore the application to a functional state as quickly as possible. The organization's data protection policy, aligned with relevant regulatory guidelines, mandates a minimum retention period of 30 days for all application data and requires that backups for the last 7 days be immutable to prevent tampering. IBM Spectrum Protect Plus is used for backup and recovery. The most recent backup is 2 days old and is immutable. However, there are older immutable backups available from 5 days ago and 10 days ago. The team is considering several approaches to restore the application. Option A. Restore the application from the 5-day-old immutable backup, as it meets both the immutability and retention requirements. Option B. Restore the application from the 2-day-old immutable backup, as it is the most recent and meets the immutability requirement, and the 30-day retention is still valid. Option C. Attempt to restore the application directly from production storage, bypassing the backup system entirely to achieve the fastest possible recovery. Option D. Disable immutability on the 2-day-old backup and restore from it to expedite the recovery process. The correct answer is A. Restore the application from the 5-day-old immutable backup, as it meets both the immutability and retention requirements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in data protection and disaster recovery, balancing the need for rapid recovery with the regulatory requirements for data retention and immutability. The professional challenge lies in interpreting and applying the specific retention policies mandated by the regulatory framework relevant to IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. One implementation, which in this context is assumed to be governed by a hypothetical, yet representative, set of data protection regulations. The need for immediate restoration of a critical application, coupled with the potential for data corruption or ransomware attacks, creates a high-pressure environment where swift, yet compliant, decisions are paramount. Misinterpreting or overlooking retention requirements can lead to significant compliance violations, financial penalties, and reputational damage. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves leveraging IBM Spectrum Protect Plus's capabilities to restore the application from a point-in-time backup that adheres to the defined immutability and retention policies. This demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing data integrity and regulatory compliance. Specifically, it ensures that the restored data is not only functional, but also meets the legal and organizational requirements for how long data must be preserved and protected from alteration. This aligns with the principle of least privilege and defense in depth in data security and recovery, ensuring that the recovery process itself does not introduce new compliance risks. Adhering to immutability policies, where applicable, is crucial for protecting against ransomware and ensuring that a clean, uncompromised backup is available for restoration, thereby meeting the spirit of data protection regulations. Incorrect approaches analysis. Restoring from the most recent available backup, regardless of its retention status or immutability, is a regulatory failure because it bypasses established data retention policies. This could result in the restoration of data that is no longer legally permitted to be retained or, conversely, data that has been tampered with if immutability was not enforced. This approach prioritizes speed over compliance and security. Attempting to restore directly from production storage without using a validated backup is a severe regulatory and ethical failure. It completely disregards the principles of data backup and recovery, which are fundamental to business continuity and disaster recovery planning, and often mandated by regulations. This action would likely violate data integrity, auditability, and retention requirements, exposing the organization to significant legal and operational risks. Disabling immutability settings on the backup repository to expedite the restore process is a direct violation of data protection regulations that mandate immutable backups for specific data types or periods. This action compromises the integrity of the backup data, making it vulnerable to accidental deletion or malicious modification, and directly contravenes the purpose of immutability, which is to ensure data availability and integrity in the event of an incident. Professional reasoning. Professionals faced with such a scenario should first consult the organization's data protection policies and the relevant regulatory framework governing data retention and immutability. They should then assess the available backup points within IBM Spectrum Protect Plus, verifying their compliance with these policies. The decision-making process should prioritize restoring from a backup that meets all retention and immutability requirements, even if it means a slightly longer recovery time, as compliance and data integrity are paramount. If immediate restoration from a compliant backup is not feasible, the professional should escalate the issue to management and legal counsel to determine the appropriate course of action, which may involve documented exceptions or alternative recovery strategies that still adhere to the spirit of the regulations. Question 10. The efficiency study reveals that the current IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10 1 configuration for long-term data archiving is optimized for storage cost reduction by using a tiered storage approach with frequent data movement. However, a recent internal audit has raised concerns about the potential impact of this frequent data movement on the immutability of archived backup data, which is critical for meeting specific industry regulatory requirements for audit trail integrity. Which of the following approaches best addresses this concern while ensuring regulatory compliance? Option A. Rely on the existing tiered storage configuration, assuming that the data movement process is sufficiently robust to maintain data integrity, and that the regulatory requirement for immutability primarily pertains to the source data, not the archived backups. Option B. Increase the frequency of data integrity checks on the tiered storage system and document these checks as evidence of compliance, without altering the existing data movement strategy. Option C. Implement a policy within IBM Spectrum Protect Plus that leverages its immutability features for all archived backup data, ensuring that data cannot be altered or deleted for the duration of the regulatory retention period, even if it requires adjustments to the tiered storage strategy to minimize data movement impact on immutability. Option D. Disable the immutability feature in IBM Spectrum. Protect Plus for archived data to streamline the data movement process and reduce operational overhead, as the primary regulatory concern is data availability, not its absolute immutability. The correct answer is C. Implement a policy within IBM Spectrum Protect Plus that leverages its immutability features for all archived backup data, ensuring that data cannot be altered or deleted for the duration of the regulatory retention period, even if it requires adjustments to the tiered storage strategy to minimize data movement impact on immutability. Explanation: the efficiency study reveals a potential gap in how IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. One is configured to meet regulatory compliance requirements for data retention and immutability. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a deep understanding of both the technical capabilities of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus and the specific regulatory obligations applicable to the organization. Misinterpreting these requirements can lead to significant legal and financial penalties, as well as reputational damage. The core challenge lies in balancing operational efficiency with the stringent demands of regulatory frameworks. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the applicable regulatory framework, e.g., SEC Rule 17a4 for financial services, HIPAA for healthcare, GDPR for data privacy, etc., depending on the specific jurisdiction and industry, and mapping these requirements directly to the configuration options within IBM Spectrum Protect Plus. This includes understanding how retention policies are set, how immutability features, like immutability for backups, are applied, and how audit trails are maintained. Best professional practice dictates that the configuration must demonstrably meet or exceed the minimum requirements of the relevant regulations. This ensures data integrity, availability, and protection against unauthorized deletion or modification for the mandated periods, thereby safeguarding the organization from non-compliance. An incorrect approach that prioritizes only operational efficiency without a direct mapping to regulatory mandates is professionally unacceptable. For instance, setting retention periods based solely on perceived business needs without considering regulatory minimums fails to meet legal obligations. This constitutes a regulatory failure because it directly contravenes the spirit and letter of laws requiring data to be preserved for specific durations. Another incorrect approach might be to assume that default settings in IBM Spectrum Protect Plus are automatically compliant. This is a critical ethical and regulatory failure, as compliance is an active responsibility, not a passive state. Relying on defaults without verification can lead to non-compliance if those defaults do not align with specific regulatory mandates. Furthermore, neglecting to configure immutability features when required by regulations, e.g., for financial records, is a severe regulatory failure, as it leaves data vulnerable to tampering or accidental deletion, undermining the integrity of audit trails and evidence. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Identify all applicable regulatory frameworks relevant to the data being protected. 2. Thoroughly understand the specific requirements of each regulation concerning data retention, immutability, access controls, and audit logging. 3. Analyze the capabilities of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. To determine how these features can be configured to meet each regulatory requirement. 4. Document the configuration decisions and the rationale behind them, explicitly linking them to specific regulatory clauses. 5. Implement and regularly test the configuration to ensure ongoing compliance. 6. Seek expert advice when in doubt about regulatory interpretation or technical implementation. Question 11. The monitoring system demonstrates an unusual spike in activity related to IBM Spectrum Protect Plus backup jobs, prompting an urgent need for investigation. To expedite troubleshooting, a junior administrator suggests temporarily granting broad, read-write access to the monitoring system's underlying data store for all IT personnel involved in the investigation, without requiring specific authorization for each access. What is the most appropriate course of action to ensure regulatory compliance and data integrity? Option A. Proceed with the investigation using existing limited access, accepting potential delays in identifying the root cause of the backup job anomalies. Option B. Grant temporary, broad read-write access to the monitoring system's data store for all IT personnel involved in the investigation to expedite data retrieval. Option C. Disable security features on the monitoring system temporarily to allow unrestricted access for faster data analysis. Option D. Implement granular, role-based access controls for the investigation team, ensuring all access is logged and audited, and restrict permissions to the minimum necessary for troubleshooting. The correct answer is D. Implement granular, role-based access controls for the investigation team, ensuring all access is logged and audited, and restrict permissions to the minimum necessary for troubleshooting. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for data access with the long-term implications of regulatory compliance and data integrity. The core tension lies in the potential for unauthorized access or modification of sensitive data if the monitoring system's access controls are not robustly managed, especially when dealing with critical backup and recovery data managed by IBM Spectrum Protect Plus. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes adherence to the regulatory framework governing data protection and access within the specified jurisdiction, by ensuring that all access to the monitoring system, particularly concerning sensitive IBM Spectrum Protect Plus data, is logged, audited, and restricted to authorized personnel with a legitimate business need. The organization upholds principles of data governance and security. This aligns with the implicit requirements of regulatory frameworks that mandate accountability and prevent unauthorized data exposure or manipulation. The focus on documented procedures and regular review of access logs ensures ongoing compliance and mitigates risks associated with data breaches or misuse. An incorrect approach that involves granting broad, unmonitored access to the monitoring system for troubleshooting purposes poses significant regulatory and ethical failures. It violates the principle of least privilege, which is a cornerstone of data security and regulatory compliance. Such an approach increases the risk of accidental data deletion, modification, or unauthorized disclosure, leading to potential violations of data privacy laws and industry-specific regulations. Furthermore, the lack of audit trails makes it impossible to determine who accessed what data and when, hindering any investigation into security incidents and preventing the organization from demonstrating compliance to auditors. Another incorrect approach, such as disabling security features on the monitoring system to expedite data retrieval, is equally problematic. This directly contravenes security best practices and regulatory mandates that require the implementation of appropriate technical and organizational measures to protect data. Disabling security features creates vulnerabilities that can be exploited by malicious actors, leading to data breaches and severe legal and financial repercussions. It demonstrates a disregard for the organization's responsibility to safeguard sensitive information. The professional reasoning process for navigating such situations should involve a risk-based approach. First, identify the specific regulatory requirements applicable to the data being managed by IBM Spectrum Protect Plus and the monitoring system. Second, assess the potential risks associated with different access and monitoring strategies, considering both operational efficiency and security/compliance implications. Third, consult established security policies and procedures, and if necessary, seek guidance from legal or compliance officers. Finally, implement solutions that achieve the desired operational outcome while strictly adhering to the established regulatory framework and security best practices, ensuring that all actions are documented and auditable. Question 12. Strategic planning requires a comprehensive understanding of the regulatory landscape when implementing IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. Which of the following approaches best ensures that the solution aligns with all applicable data protection and retention mandates? Option A. Conducting a thorough assessment of all relevant data protection, privacy, and retention regulations applicable to the organization's data and jurisdiction, and then designing the IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 implementation to explicitly meet these requirements. Option B. Focusing solely on the advanced technical features of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1, such as deduplication and replication, without explicitly verifying their compliance with specific data sovereignty laws. Option C. Prioritizing the most cost-effective configuration of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. assuming that standard backup functionalities inherently meet regulatory needs. Option D. Implementing IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. One with basic security settings and relying on the IT department to address any compliance issues that may arise post-implementation. The correct answer is C. Prioritizing the most cost-effective configuration of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. Assuming that standard backup functionalities inherently meet regulatory needs. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because implementing IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 requires adherence to specific regulatory frameworks governing data protection and retention, particularly concerning sensitive information. The challenge lies in balancing the technical capabilities of the solution with the legal and compliance obligations of the organization. Careful judgment is required to ensure that data backup, recovery, and archival processes meet all mandated requirements without introducing new risks or vulnerabilities. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it proactively integrates regulatory compliance into the strategic planning and implementation phases. This ensures that the chosen configuration and operational procedures for IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 align with relevant data protection laws and industry-specific regulations. By conducting a thorough assessment of applicable regulations and designing the solution to meet these requirements from the outset, the organization minimizes the risk of non-compliance, potential fines, and reputational damage. This approach demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to responsible data stewardship. An incorrect approach that prioritizes cost savings over regulatory mandates would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for legal obligations, potentially leading to severe penalties for non-compliance with data retention, privacy, or security laws. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on technical features without considering data sovereignty and cross-border data transfer regulations would also be a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This oversight could result in the organization violating laws that dictate where and how data can be stored and processed, especially if the data is subject to specific jurisdictional controls. A third incorrect approach that neglects to establish clear data access controls and audit trails, even if the backup solution itself is compliant, would be a failure in operational security and governance, potentially exposing sensitive data to unauthorized access and hindering forensic investigations if a breach occurs. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying all applicable regulatory requirements relevant to the data being protected and the organization's operating jurisdiction. This should be followed by a risk assessment to understand how the implementation of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 might impact compliance. The chosen strategy should then be evaluated against these identified requirements and risks, prioritizing solutions and configurations that demonstrably meet or exceed compliance standards. Regular review and validation of the implemented solution against evolving regulations are also crucial components of this framework. Question 13. Operational review demonstrates that IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 is configured with a single, generic retention policy across all backed-up data, which may not align with the diverse data retention requirements stipulated by various industry-specific regulations. Which of the following actions best addresses this potential compliance gap? Option A. Manually track and delete backup data based on an ad hoc assessment of operational needs and perceived data relevance, overriding the system's automated retention. Option B. Implement granular retention policies within IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 that are tailored to the specific retention periods mandated by applicable regulatory frameworks for different data types and applications. Option C. Prioritize storage cost reduction by configuring the shortest possible retention periods in IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 even if they are shorter than some regulatory minimums. Option D. Rely on the default retention settings provided by IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 assuming they are generally compliant with most common regulatory standards. The correct answer is B. Implement granular retention policies within IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 that are tailored to the specific retention periods mandated by applicable regulatory frameworks for different data types and applications. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in IT environments where data protection and regulatory compliance are paramount. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for efficient data recovery with the stringent requirements of data retention policies mandated by regulatory frameworks. IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. Like any data protection solution, must be configured to meet these obligations. The challenge is to ensure that data is not only recoverable within defined service level agreements, SLAs, but also retained for the legally required periods, without incurring unnecessary storage costs or risking noncompliance due to premature deletion or insufficient retention. The operational review highlights a potential gap between the system's current configuration and the established compliance mandates. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1.One's backup and retention policies against the specific regulatory requirements applicable to the organization's industry and jurisdiction. This means understanding the minimum and maximum retention periods for different types of data, as defined by relevant laws and industry guidelines. Implementing granular retention settings within Spectrum Protect Plus, such as defining specific retention durations for different data classes or applications, is crucial. This ensures that data is kept for the required duration and then automatically expired, preventing both data loss due to premature deletion and compliance violations due to extended retention beyond legal limits. This approach directly addresses the regulatory mandate by aligning the technical implementation with legal obligations, demonstrating due diligence and a commitment to compliance. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to rely solely on default retention settings within IBM Spectrum Protect Plus without verifying their alignment with regulatory mandates. This is a failure because default settings are often generic and may not meet specific legal or industry-specific retention periods. This can lead to data being deleted too early, violating retention laws, or being kept for too long, incurring unnecessary costs, and potentially creating new compliance risks if sensitive data is retained beyond its legal necessity. Another incorrect approach is to manually manage data deletion based on perceived operational needs rather than documented retention policies. This is professionally unacceptable because it introduces human error and subjectivity into a critical compliance process. It is highly unlikely to consistently meet the precise retention periods required by regulations, leading to potential noncompliance and audit failures. Furthermore, it bypasses the automated capabilities of Spectrum Protect Plus designed to enforce retention policies. A third incorrect approach is to prioritize storage cost reduction by setting overly aggressive, short-term retention policies that do not account for regulatory requirements. While cost efficiency is important, it must not supersede legal obligations. This approach directly violates regulatory frameworks by failing to retain data for the mandated periods, exposing the organization to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and operational disruption during audits or investigations. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with implementing and managing IBM Spectrum Protect Plus must adopt a risk-based, compliance-first mindset. The decision-making process should begin with a comprehensive understanding of all applicable regulatory requirements. This involves consulting legal counsel and compliance officers to identify specific data retention mandates. Subsequently, the technical implementation of Spectrum Protect Plus must be designed to directly enforce these mandates through its policy engine. Regular audits and reviews of the configuration against evolving regulations are essential to maintain ongoing compliance. When faced with conflicting priorities, such as cost savings versus compliance, the regulatory requirements must always take precedence. The goal is to achieve a balance where data is protected, recoverable, and retained according to legal obligations, while also being managed efficiently. Question 14. The evaluation methodology shows that a new IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. Implementation is underway. Which of the following approaches best ensures adherence to regulatory requirements concerning data protection and privacy throughout the implementation and operational phases? Option A. Conduct a thorough assessment of all applicable data protection regulations and privacy laws. Map these requirements to the capabilities of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. And integrate compliance controls into the implementation plan and ongoing operational procedures. Option B. Assume that the default configurations of IBM Spectrum Protect plus V10 1 are compliant with all relevant regulations and only investigate specific compliance issues if a regulatory audit is initiated. Option C. Focus solely on the technical performance and recovery objectives of IBM Spectrum Protect plus V10 1. Assuming that regulatory compliance is the responsibility of a separate department and does not directly impact the implementation process. Option D. Prioritize the rapid deployment of IBM Spectrum Protect plus V10 1 to achieve immediate data resilience benefits with a plan to address regulatory compliance post-implementation. The correct answer is D. Prioritize the rapid deployment of IBM Spectrum Protect plus V10 1 to achieve immediate data resilience benefits with a plan to address regulatory compliance post-implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between rapid deployment of a new technology like IBM Spectrum Protect plus V10 and the stringent regulatory requirements for data protection and privacy. Organizations must balance the benefits of enhanced data resilience and recovery with the imperative to comply with applicable laws and industry standards. The core of the challenge lies in ensuring that the implementation process itself and the ongoing operation of the solution do not inadvertently create compliance gaps or expose sensitive data. Careful judgment is required to integrate regulatory considerations into every phase of the project lifecycle, from initial planning to ongoing maintenance. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it proactively embeds regulatory compliance into the IBM Spectrum Protect plus V10 1 implementation strategy. This involves a thorough understanding of the specific data protection regulations applicable to the organization's industry and geographic location. By conducting a comprehensive risk assessment that specifically addresses data privacy, security, and retention requirements, and by designing the solution to meet these identified needs, the organization demonstrates due diligence. This proactive stance ensures that the implementation not only meets technical objectives, but also aligns with legal and ethical obligations, thereby minimizing the risk of regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and data breaches. Adherence to established data governance frameworks and the principle of privacy by design are key components of this best practice. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed of deployment over regulatory due diligence would represent a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Specifically, failing to identify and address data residency requirements could lead to violations of data sovereignty laws, resulting in substantial fines and legal repercussions. Similarly, neglecting to implement appropriate access controls and encryption mechanisms for sensitive data, as mandated by regulations like GDPR or CCPA, depending on jurisdiction, would constitute a breach of data protection principles, exposing the organization to severe penalties and loss of customer trust. Another failure would be to overlook data retention and disposition policies, which are critical for compliance with legal and business requirements. Failing to configure Spectrum Protect Plus to adhere to these policies could result in the unlawful retention or premature deletion of data, leading to legal complications. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach that prioritizes risk identification and mitigation. This begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory landscape relevant to the data being protected. Next, a detailed assessment of how the proposed IBM Spectrum Protect plus V10 1 implementation will interact with this regulatory framework is crucial. This assessment should identify potential compliance risks and inform the design and configuration of the solution. Furthermore, ongoing monitoring and auditing mechanisms should be established to ensure continuous compliance. Collaboration between IT, legal, and compliance teams is essential throughout this process to ensure all perspectives are considered and that the chosen path is both technically sound and legally defensible. Question 15. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a basic backup strategy with IBM Spectrum Protect plus V10 1 offers significant immediate cost savings. However, the organization operates in a sector with stringent data privacy regulations, which approach best ensures long-term regulatory compliance and minimizes future risk. Option A. Conduct a thorough assessment of all applicable data privacy regulations and configure IBM Spectrum Protect plus V10 1 One, to meet each specific requirement, documenting all compliance-related decisions. Option B, focus solely on the technical performance metrics of IBM Spectrum Protect plus V10. 1. As regulatory compliance is a separate concern to be handled by the legal department. Option C, prioritize the cost savings by implementing the basic backup strategy and address any potential compliance gaps reactively if they arise. Option D, assume that standard backup practices are sufficient for regulatory compliance and proceed with the basic implementation, relying on general industry best practices. The correct answer is C. Prioritize the cost savings by implementing the basic backup strategy and address any potential compliance gaps reactively if they arise. Explanation: scenario analysis, implementing IBM Spectrum Protect plus V10. 1 involves managing sensitive data, which necessitates strict adherence to regulatory compliance frameworks. The challenge lies in balancing the cost of implementing robust security and data protection measures against the potential costs of noncompliance, such as fines, reputational damage, and business disruption. A key aspect of this is ensuring that the chosen data protection strategy aligns with the specific regulatory requirements applicable to the organization's industry and geographic location. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a deep understanding of both the technical capabilities of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus and the intricate details of relevant regulations, demanding a proactive rather than reactive approach to compliance. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a comprehensive review of applicable regulatory frameworks, e.g., GDPR, CCPA, HIPAA, depending on jurisdiction and industry, and then maps the features and capabilities of IBM Spectrum Protect plus V10. 1 to meet those specific requirements. This involves understanding how the software's backup, recovery, immutability, and data retention features can be configured to satisfy legal obligations for data integrity, availability, and privacy. For instance, if GDPR is applicable, the solution must ensure data subject rights, like the right to erasure, can be facilitated, and that data is protected against unauthorized access or loss. This approach represents best professional practice because it embeds compliance into the core of the implementation strategy, minimizing risk and ensuring long-term adherence to legal and ethical standards. It demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to protecting both the organization and its stakeholders. Incorrect approach is analysis. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on the cost savings of a less comprehensive implementation without a thorough assessment of regulatory mandates. This could lead to a solution that is cheaper in the short term, but fails to meet compliance requirements, resulting in significant financial penalties and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach is to assume that a standard backup configuration will automatically satisfy all regulatory needs. This overlooks the nuanced requirements of different regulations, such as specific data retention periods, encryption standards, or audit trail logging, which may necessitate custom configurations or additional security measures. Furthermore, neglecting to document the compliance rationale behind specific configuration choices makes it difficult to demonstrate adherence during an audit, a critical failure in regulatory accountability. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a risk-based approach to regulatory compliance when implementing solutions like IBM Spectrum Protect Plus. This involves 1. Identifying all relevant regulatory obligations based on the organization's operational context. 2. Assessing the capabilities of the chosen technology against these obligations. 3. Prioritizing compliance requirements that carry the highest risk of penalty or reputational harm. 4. Developing and documenting a clear implementation plan that explicitly addresses how each regulatory requirement will be met. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating the compliance strategy as regulations evolve or the technology landscape changes. This systematic process ensures that technical decisions are informed by legal and ethical considerations, leading to a robust and compliant data protection posture. Question 16. The performance metrics show a consistent increase in storage utilization for IBM Spectrum Protect plus V10. 1 backup data, approaching capacity limits. Given the organization's commitment to adhering to data retention regulations, which of the following actions is the most appropriate initial step to address this situation while ensuring compliance? Option A. Review and validate the configured retention policies within IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 against current regulatory requirements and assess the impact of any potential adjustments on compliance. Option B. Continue monitoring storage utilization without making immediate changes, assuming the issue will resolve itself. Option C. Immediately reduce the retention period for all backup data to the minimum acceptable level to alleviate storage pressure. Option D. Disable immutability settings on recently created backup data to free up storage space. The correct answer is A. Review and validate the configured retention policies within IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 against current regulatory requirements and assess the impact of any potential adjustments on compliance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in IT environments where data protection solutions are implemented. The challenge lies in balancing the need for efficient data recovery with the regulatory requirements for data retention and immutability. Organizations are under increasing pressure to demonstrate compliance with data protection laws and industry-specific regulations, which often mandate specific retention periods and protection against data alteration or deletion. Failure to meet these requirements can result in significant fines, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. The performance metrics, while indicating a potential issue with storage capacity, must be interpreted within the context of these overarching compliance obligations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough review of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1's retention policies and immutability settings in conjunction with the organization's specific regulatory obligations. This means verifying that the current configuration aligns with legal mandates for data retention periods and that immutability features are correctly configured to prevent unauthorized modifications or deletions of backup data. IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 offers granular control over retention, allowing administrators to set policies based on regulatory requirements. Ensuring these policies are correctly implemented and validated against audit logs is paramount for demonstrating compliance. This proactive approach safeguards against data loss and ensures the organization can meet its legal obligations during an audit or incident. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to immediately reduce the retention period for all backup data solely to address the performance metrics. This action could lead to non-compliance with regulatory requirements, such as those mandating longer retention for financial records or patient data. Such a decision would be a direct violation of data protection laws and could result in severe penalties. Another incorrect approach would be to disable immutability features on backup data to free up storage space. Immutability is a critical security control designed to protect backup data from ransomware attacks and insider threats. Disabling it would expose the organization to significant risks of data tampering or deletion, undermining the integrity of its backup strategy, and potentially violating regulations that require data integrity and protection against unauthorized access. A third incorrect approach would be to ignore the performance metrics and continue with the current configuration without investigation. This passive stance risks system instability and potential data loss if the storage capacity issue escalates. More importantly, it fails to address a potential symptom that could be linked to misconfigured retention policies or other compliance-related issues, leaving the organization vulnerable to regulatory scrutiny. Professional reasoning. Professionals faced with this situation should adopt a systematic, compliance-first approach. The decision-making process should begin with a comprehensive understanding of all applicable regulatory frameworks and internal data retention policies. Next, they should analyze the performance metrics in the context of these requirements. This involves investigating the root cause of the performance issue, which may or may not be directly related to retention settings. If retention settings are identified as a contributing factor, any proposed adjustments must be carefully evaluated against regulatory mandates. This often involves consulting with legal and compliance teams. The use of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1's reporting and auditing features is crucial for validating configurations and demonstrating compliance. Prioritizing regulatory adherence ensures that technical solutions are implemented in a manner that supports, rather than undermines, the organization's legal and ethical obligations. Question 17. Benchmark analysis indicates that while IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10 1. One offers robust data protection capabilities. A comprehensive risk assessment is crucial for its effective deployment. Considering the potential for various threats and vulnerabilities, which of the following approaches to risk assessment best aligns with regulatory expectations for data protection and operational resilience? Option A. Conducting a broad threat identification exercise and then focusing mitigation efforts on the most commonly discussed threats, such as ransomware, without a detailed impact analysis for other potential risks. Option B. Prioritizing mitigation efforts based on the perceived ease of implementation and cost-effectiveness of the solution, regardless of the actual risk severity. Option C. Deferring the primary risk assessment responsibilities to the technical implementation team without engaging broader business, legal, and compliance stakeholders. Option D. Implementing a systematic risk assessment process that identifies assets, threats, vulnerabilities, and potential impacts, quantifies or qualifies likelihood and impact, and prioritizes mitigation based on a defined risk appetite and regulatory requirements. Correct answer is B. Prioritizing mitigation efforts based on the perceived ease of implementation and cost-effectiveness of the solution, regardless of the actual risk severity. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in IT risk management, balancing the need for robust data protection with the practical constraints of resource allocation and operational efficiency. The implementation of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 involves assessing potential threats and vulnerabilities to the protected data. A key difficulty lies in prioritizing risks when multiple potential issues exist, each with varying degrees of impact and likelihood. The professional challenge is to move beyond a superficial understanding of risks to a nuanced evaluation that informs strategic decision-making and resource deployment effectively, ensuring compliance with relevant regulations without hindering business operations unnecessarily. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and documented risk assessment process that aligns with the principles of data protection and business continuity. This includes identifying assets, data, systems, threats, malware, hardware failure, vulnerabilities, unpatched software, weak access control, and potential impacts, data loss, downtime, reputational damage. The process should then quantify or qualify the likelihood and impact of each identified risk. Based on this analysis, risks are prioritized and mitigation strategies are developed. This aligns with the general principles of data protection regulations, which mandate that organizations take appropriate technical and organizational measures to protect data. For example, under GDPR, if this were the jurisdiction, but adhering to the exam's implied U.S. context, similar principles apply to HIPAA or other data privacy laws. A risk-based approach is fundamental to determining the appropriate level of security. By focusing on the most significant risks, resources are allocated efficiently to address the highest priorities, ensuring compliance and safeguarding critical data assets. This methodical approach demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to responsible data management. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to focus solely on the most frequently reported or easily understood threats, such as ransomware, without a comprehensive analysis of other potential risks like insider threats, accidental data deletion, or natural disasters. This narrow focus can lead to misallocation of resources, leaving critical vulnerabilities unaddressed and potentially violating regulatory requirements for a holistic risk management strategy. Another incorrect approach is to prioritize risks based on the perceived cost of implementing a mitigation strategy, rather than the actual risk level. This can lead to under-resourcing the mitigation of high-impact, low-likelihood events, which, if they occur, could have catastrophic consequences and result in significant regulatory penalties and business disruption. This approach fails to demonstrate the required due diligence in protecting sensitive data. A third incorrect approach is to defer risk assessment entirely to the implementation team without involving relevant stakeholders from business units, legal, and compliance. This can result in a technically sound but operationally or legally inadequate risk assessment, failing to capture the full scope of business impact and regulatory obligations. This lack of cross-functional input is a failure in establishing a comprehensive and compliant risk management framework. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured, documented, and iterative risk assessment methodology. This involves clearly defining the scope of the assessment, identifying all relevant assets and potential threats, and systematically evaluating the likelihood and impact of each risk. The process should be collaborative, involving all necessary stakeholders to ensure a comprehensive understanding of the business context and regulatory landscape. Prioritization should be based on a clear understanding of risk appetite and the potential consequences of risk realization. Mitigation strategies should be proportionate to the identified risks and regularly reviewed and updated. This systematic approach ensures that resources are used effectively, compliance is maintained, and the organization's data and operations are adequately protected. Question 18. Stakeholder feedback indicates a strong desire to deploy IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. Immediately to address perceived gaps in current data protection capabilities, but concerns have been raised about the thoroughness of the pre-deployment risk assessment. Which of the following actions best aligns with professional best practices and regulatory expectations for implementing such a critical data protection solution? Option A. Conduct a focused but formal risk assessment specifically targeting the immediate deployment concerns and potential impact on critical data, and use the findings to inform a phased rollout plan. Option B. Implement a minimal viable deployment of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 with only the most basic functionalities, and postpone the assessment of advanced features and associated risks until after the initial rollout. Option C. Defer the deployment until a comprehensive, multi-week risk assessment can be completed, even if it means delaying the perceived immediate benefits of the new solution. Option D. Proceed with the full deployment as requested by stakeholders, documenting the feedback as a justification for expedited implementation and planning to address any emergent issues post-deployment. The correct answer is D. Proceed with the full deployment as requested by stakeholders, documenting the feedback as a justification for expedited implementation and planning to address any emergent issues post-deployment. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in IT implementation projects where the perceived urgency of a business requirement clashes with the structured, risk-aware approach mandated by regulatory compliance. The challenge lies in balancing the need for rapid deployment with the imperative to thoroughly assess and mitigate potential risks that could impact data integrity, availability, or security, all of which are critical under regulatory frameworks governing data protection and business continuity. The correct approach, which involves a formal risk assessment process prior to full deployment, represents best professional practice because it directly aligns with regulatory requirements for due diligence and responsible IT management, specifically within the context of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. Implementation. This aligns with the principles of ensuring data resilience and security as expected by general IT governance and data protection regulations. A formal risk assessment allows for the identification of potential vulnerabilities, such as misconfigurations, inadequate resource allocation, or integration issues, and the development of mitigation strategies. This proactive stance minimizes the likelihood of data loss, service disruption, or security breaches, thereby upholding the organization's compliance obligations and protecting its reputation. An incorrect approach that bypasses or inadequately performs a risk assessment would represent a significant regulatory and ethical failure. For instance, proceeding with deployment based solely on stakeholder pressure, without understanding the potential impact on data backup and recovery capabilities, could violate data protection regulations that mandate the safeguarding of sensitive information, could also contravene business continuity planning requirements, which necessitate robust data protection mechanisms. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for professional responsibility to ensure the integrity and security of the systems being implemented, potentially exposing the organization and its data subjects to undue risk. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the project scope, the regulatory landscape, and the organization's risk tolerance. When faced with conflicting priorities, a professional should 1. Clearly articulate the risks associated with bypassing or abbreviating the risk assessment process, referencing potential regulatory noncompliance and business impact. 2. Advocate for adherence to established risk management procedures, emphasizing that these are not mere bureaucratic hurdles but essential safeguards. 3. Propose a streamlined but still comprehensive risk assessment methodology if time is a critical factor, ensuring that key risks are still identified and addressed. 4. Escalate the issue to senior management or a risk committee if stakeholder pressure continues to override necessary due diligence, providing them with the information needed to make an informed decision about accepting residual risk. Question 19. The assessment process reveals that the IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10 1 implementation is nearing its deployment phase. To ensure a robust security posture, a comprehensive risk assessment is required. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional best practices for identifying and mitigating potential threats to the data protection solution? Option A. Focus exclusively on identifying technical vulnerabilities within the IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 software code, neglecting potential operational or human-related risks. Option B. Conduct a broad, high-level risk assessment using generic IT security threat categories without specific consideration for IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1's unique features and functionalities. Option C. Prioritize identifying and analyzing risks that are specific to the architecture, configuration, and operational use of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. Including its backup, replication, and immutability capabilities, and assess their potential impact on data integrity and availability. Option D. Defer the detailed risk assessment until after the system has been fully deployed and is in production, relying on incident response to identify and address risks. Correct answer is B. Conduct a broad, high-level risk assessment using generic IT security threat categories without specific consideration for IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1's unique features and functionalities. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a critical juncture in the implementation of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. Specifically concerning the risk assessment phase. This scenario is professionally challenging because a thorough and accurate risk assessment is foundational to a secure and compliant data protection strategy. Misidentifying or underestimating risks can lead to significant data loss, security breaches, regulatory penalties, and reputational damage. The chosen approach must align with the principles of robust risk management and adhere to any applicable regulatory frameworks that govern data protection and IT security within the relevant jurisdiction. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it systematically identifies, analyzes, and prioritizes potential threats and vulnerabilities relevant to the IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1 implementation. This involves considering the specific functionalities of the software, the data it protects, the underlying infrastructure, and the potential impact of various risk events. By adopting a structured methodology, such as one that incorporates threat modeling and impact analysis, professionals can develop effective mitigation strategies that are proportionate to the identified risks. This proactive stance ensures that security controls are implemented where they are most needed, optimizing resource allocation and enhancing overall resilience. Adherence to best practices in risk assessment is often implicitly or explicitly required by regulatory guidelines that mandate a risk-based approach to information security. An incorrect approach that fails to consider the specific context of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. For instance, by using generic risk categories without tailoring them to the software's features, e.g., backup, replication, immutability, would be professionally unacceptable. This oversight could lead to critical risks being missed, such as vulnerabilities in the backup agent or misconfigurations in replication policies, which are specific to the product. Ethically, this demonstrates a lack of due diligence in protecting client data. Another incorrect approach might be to focus solely on technical vulnerabilities while neglecting operational or human factor risks, such as inadequate training for administrators or insufficient access controls. This narrow focus ignores the broader attack surface and can leave the system susceptible to breaches that are not purely technical in nature. Such an approach fails to meet the comprehensive requirements of a thorough risk assessment mandated by a risk-based security posture. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a systematic, iterative approach to risk assessment. This begins with defining the scope and context of the system being assessed, followed by identifying potential threats and vulnerabilities. Next, the likelihood and impact of these risks are analyzed to determine their severity. Based on this analysis, appropriate mitigation strategies are developed and implemented. Finally, the effectiveness of these controls is continuously monitored and reviewed, with the risk assessment updated as the system evolves or new threats emerge. This cyclical process ensures that risk management remains a dynamic and integral part of the IT lifecycle. Question 20. Compliance review shows that the implementation of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10 1 has not adequately addressed potential data corruption risks during backup and restore operations. Which of the following approaches best aligns with regulatory requirements for data integrity and availability? Option A. Rely on the default configuration settings of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. Assuming that the vendor has implemented sufficient safeguards against data corruption and only address issues if they are reported by end users. Option B. Conduct a detailed risk assessment specifically for the backup and restore processes within IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. Identifying potential failure points, data corruption vectors, and their impact. Develop and implement targeted mitigation strategies, such as enhanced data integrity checks, redundant storage for critical metadata, and a robust testing plan for restore operations, ensuring these measures are documented and regularly reviewed. Option C. Prioritize the speed of the backup and restore operations by disabling non-essential data integrity checks to reduce processing overhead, as regulatory focus is primarily on data recovery time objectives. Option D. Implement a broad, general-purpose security awareness training program for all IT staff, believing that human error is the sole cause of data corruption and that general training will inherently mitigate all related risks. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed risk assessment specifically for the backup and restore processes within IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. Identifying potential failure points, data corruption vectors, and their impact. Develop and implement targeted mitigation strategies, such as enhanced data integrity checks, redundant storage for critical metadata, and a robust testing plan for restore operations, ensuring these measures are documented and regularly reviewed. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in IT risk management, balancing the need for robust data protection with operational efficiency and resource constraints. The challenge lies in accurately identifying and prioritizing risks associated with IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. Implementation. Ensuring that the chosen mitigation strategies are both effective and compliant with relevant regulations. A deep understanding of the specific risks inherent in data protection solutions, coupled with an awareness of regulatory expectations for data integrity and availability, is crucial for making sound decisions. The correct approach involves a systematic and comprehensive risk assessment process that directly informs the implementation strategy. This method is best professional practice because it aligns with the fundamental principles of risk management and regulatory compliance. By identifying potential threats and vulnerabilities, evaluating their impact, and developing targeted mitigation plans, organizations can proactively address weaknesses before they are exploited. This proactive stance is often mandated or strongly implied by regulatory frameworks that require organizations to maintain the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. For example, regulations often stipulate that organizations must have appropriate technical and organizational measures in place to protect data, which necessitates a thorough risk assessment to determine what those measures should be. Incorrect approaches fail to adequately address the complexities of risk management and regulatory requirements. One incorrect approach might involve a superficial assessment that only considers the most obvious or easily quantifiable risks, neglecting less apparent but potentially severe threats. This could lead to inadequate security controls and a failure to meet regulatory obligations for comprehensive data protection. Another incorrect approach might prioritize cost savings or speed of implementation over thorough risk evaluation, resulting in a solution that is vulnerable to attack or data loss. Such an approach directly contravenes regulatory expectations for due diligence and the implementation of effective safeguards. A third incorrect approach might rely solely on vendor-provided risk assessments without independent validation, which can be problematic as vendor assessments may not fully account for the specific operational environment or unique regulatory landscape of the implementing organization. This can lead to a false sense of security and a failure to identify critical risks. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory landscape and the specific requirements of IBM Spectrum Protect Plus V10. 1. 1. This should be followed by a structured risk assessment methodology that includes threat identification, vulnerability analysis, impact assessment, and the development of risk treatment plans. The process should be iterative, with regular reviews and updates to reflect changes in the threat landscape, technology, and regulatory requirements. Collaboration with relevant stakeholders, including IT security, legal, and business units, is essential to ensure that the risk assessment and mitigation strategies are comprehensive and aligned with organizational objectives and compliance obligations.